It was like waking up inside a comedy sketch gone terribly wrong. I stumbled out of bed, groggy and desperate for my first sip of coffee, only to be greeted by a sight so absurd it nearly knocked me back through my front door. My driveway, my own personal slab of concrete, the one I paid for with my hard-earned money, was now lined with vicious metal spike strips. Not one or two, but a full row of tire-shredding monstrosities stretching from one end to the other like some medieval defense system designed to repel invaders. For a split second, I genuinely wondered if I'd been transported into some dystopian nightmare where homeowners had to booby-trap their own properties just to survive. Then the real horror sank in. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some strange municipal mistake. No, this had the unmistakable stench of one person's handiwork. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the neighborhood dictator who ruled with an iron fist and an unshakable belief that her word was law. Standing smugly at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed over her aggressively beige cardigan, Karen beamed at me like she had just unveiled a masterpiece. "Good morning, neighbor," she chirped, her voice dripping with false cheer, as though she hadn't just committed an act of driveway terrorism. I blinked at her, still trying to process the absurdity of the situation. "What the hell is this?" I finally managed, waving a hand at the spike. Karen clutched her clipboard, a weapon she wielded like a knight's sword, and flipped through some undoubtedly fabricated HOA regulation sheet. "Oh, just a little compliance reinforcement," she said, as if she had installed a decorative flower bed instead of a set of industrial-grade tire killers. According to subsection blah blah blah, she waved a dismissive hand at her clipboard. "Non-compliant driveways need to be dealt with. Yours has been an issue for quite some time. The cracks, the slight discoloration, and of course the fact that it's," she lowered her voice like she was revealing some forbidden secret, "not HOA-approved concrete." I stared at her, half expecting a hidden camera crew to jump out and tell me I was on some prank show. But no, Karen was dead serious. The audacity. The sheer lunacy. "You put spike strips on my property?" I asked, my voice rising with incredulity. "Without my permission?" Karen didn't even flinch. "It's for the good of the community," she said, nodding to herself as if she were the hero in this situation. "Too many people have been, well, ignoring the rules lately. Consider this a friendly reminder to comply." Friendly reminder? Friendly reminder? That was like calling a nuclear strike a gentle warning. My brain struggled to form a coherent response because the level of entitlement radiating from this woman was so intense it was practically warping reality around us. I had heard stories from the neighbors, tales of Karen's reign of terror, of fines for absurd reasons like holiday decorations staying up one day too long or grass being 0.2 inches too high, but this was a whole new level of psychopathy. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to remain calm. "Remove them. Now." Karen gasped, clutching her chest like I had just slapped her across the face. "Oh, I'm afraid that's not possible," she said, shaking her head in exaggerated sorrow. "You see, HOA funds were used for this installation, and removing it without proper authorization would be a violation." "A violation? A violation?" My patience was hanging by a thread. "Karen," I said, rubbing my temples, "you realize this is illegal, right? You cannot, under any circumstances, alter someone's private property without their consent. You've literally committed vandalism." Karen scoffed. "Oh, vandalism, really?" she mocked. "That's such a strong word. I prefer proactive neighborhood maintenance." I took a deep, slow breath, counting to 10, because if I didn't, there was a very real chance I would snap and launch her clipboard into the stratosphere. "Fine," I said finally, voice dangerously calm. "Then let's see how the police feel about proactive neighborhood maintenance." I pulled out my phone, prepared to dial, but Karen's expression didn't even flicker with concern. Instead, she let out a condescending laugh, the kind that made my skin crawl. "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "I already called them. Filed a complaint about your driveway last week. Told them you were a repeat offender." My jaw nearly unhinged. Repeat offender of what? Owning a driveway? Karen shrugged. They'll be here soon. You'll see. And just like that, I realized the depths of this woman's delusions. She truly believed she was untouchable, that she could stomp all over people's rights with zero consequences, that she could control the neighborhood like some HOA-fueled dictator. But what Karen didn't know, what she had woefully underestimated, was that she had just picked the wrong homeowner to mess with. I wasn't just going to get those spikes removed. I wasn't just going to make a scene. No, I was going to make sure Karen regretted every single decision that had led her to this moment. Because if she thought she could strong-arm me with her ridiculous HOA nonsense, she had another thing coming. The petty war had just begun, and I was about to take it to a level Karen had never seen before. The police arrived exactly 15 minutes later, their cruisers rolling up with all the authority of a major incident, lights flashing, but sirens mercifully off. Karen stood with a smug expression plastered across her face, arms crossed as if she were some righteous warrior of order and justice. The way she practically strutted toward the officers made it clear. She thought she had already won. The officers stepped out, clearly expecting some major neighborhood disturbance, but the moment their eyes landed on the absurd spike strips stretched across my driveway, their expressions shifted from professional neutrality to sheer bewilderment. One officer, a middle-aged guy with a no-nonsense demeanor, scratched his head before glancing between me and Karen, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. So, he began slowly, gesturing toward the metal spike strips. Anyone want to explain why the hell this looks like a military checkpoint? Karen, ever the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, stepped forward before I could even get a word in. Oh, absolutely, officer, she purred, flipping open her clipboard like it held the sacred scriptures of the land. You see, I'm the president of the Homeowners Association here, and I've had numerous complaints about my neighbor's disregard for community regulations. His driveway is in violation of several policies, and since he has repeatedly ignored warnings, the HOA took the necessary step of installing these compliance reinforcements. She actually looked pleased with herself, like she had just unveiled a brilliant civic improvement rather than an act of absolute lunacy. The officer turned to me, eyes scanning my face for signs of a hidden camera prank. Is any of that true? He asked. I let out a slow breath, barely keeping my temper in check. Not even close. I woke up this morning to find these things installed without my consent, on my private property, by her and her so-called authority. She's claiming the HOA has the right to booby-trap people's driveways now. The second officer, a younger guy who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. Ma'am, he said to Karen, his tone patient but edged with skepticism, did you personally install these? Karen blinked as if the question itself was offensive. Of course not. I had a contractor do it. HOA funds covered the installation. The words left her mouth with such casual arrogance, like she had just announced she'd repainted a fence instead of what she had actually done, committed blatant property destruction. The officers exchanged a look, and I could practically hear the gears in their heads turning as they processed the level of sheer insanity unfolding before them. The lead officer sighed and pulled out his notepad. All right. Here's the deal. You can't install spike strips on someone's private property. That's vandalism and property damage, not to mention a safety hazard. Karen's smug expression faltered for the first time. No, you don't understand, she insisted, her voice rising slightly in pitch. This is an HOA matter. He signed the agreement when he moved in. Compliance is non-negotiable. I watched with growing satisfaction as the officer's patience rapidly dwindled. The younger cop took a few steps closer to the spike strips and nudged one of them with his boot. These are meant to destroy tires, he pointed out, almost as if he were explaining to a child. What exactly were you hoping to accomplish here? Karen's frustration visibly mounted. I was hoping he'd finally learn to follow the rules, she snapped, gesturing wildly at me. He's been nothing but a problem for the neighborhood, letting his driveway look like an eyesore, parking in non-designated areas. I laughed, unable to stop myself. Parking in non-designated areas? You mean my own driveway? Karen turned red. That's not the point, she barked. The point is that I am maintaining order in this community. And frankly, officer, I'm quite shocked that you don't seem to understand the importance of— Ma'am, the officer interrupted, clearly done with the conversation. We're gonna need you to remove these. Immediately. Karen's face twisted in sheer disbelief. You can't be serious. This is perfectly legal under HOA guidelines. It's not legal under actual laws, the officer countered dryly. And if you don't take them down, we'll have to escalate this to destruction of property charges. For the first time since this mess started, I saw it, that moment of realization flickering in Karen's eyes. The moment she understood she might have pushed too far. But just as quickly as it came, it vanished, replaced by stubborn defiance. I won't, she said, crossing her arms like a petulant child. The HOA will fight this. The officers were done playing. All right then, the lead cop said, snapping his notepad shut. We're going to have to contact the city. These are a public safety hazard, and they'll be removed one way or another. If you refuse to cooperate, we may have to press charges. Karen paled. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again as if her brain was scrambling for some kind of escape hatch. The realization that she had backed herself into a corner finally seemed to settle in, and I could see the cracks forming in her ironclad confidence. Still, she refused to admit defeat, instead turning on me like I was somehow responsible for her stupidity. This is your fault, she hissed. You never should have pushed back. This is why this neighborhood is going downhill. I just smiled, watching as the officers started making arrangements for the removal. And this is why you're about to get a nice little violation of your own, Karen. Sure enough, as soon as city authorities got involved, Karen's house was slapped with an official notice: unauthorized property modifications, misuse of HOA funds, and a hefty fine that made her eye twitch when she saw the number. But the best part? The spike strips had to be removed at her expense, including labor costs, because she had used official HOA money for an illegal modification. And while Karen tried to argue, tried to weasel her way out of responsibility, there was no talking her way out of this one. But the real justice? That was still coming. Because I wasn't done yet. This was just the warm-up. Karen's downfall didn't happen all at once. No, it came in waves, each one knocking her deeper into the hole she had so confidently dug for herself. The city wasted no time removing the spike strips from my driveway, and when the final one was pried from the pavement, it was like watching the first domino fall. The moment Karen received the bill for the removal, her face twisted into something between outrage and disbelief. She stormed out of her house, waving the notice in the air like a lunatic, screaming about how it was all a misunderstanding, how she was being persecuted for simply doing her job as HOA president. But the city officials weren't interested in her theatrics. They informed her, quite plainly, that not only was she responsible for the removal fees, but she would also be facing additional fines for unauthorized modifications to private property. That alone would have been sweet justice, but things were only getting started. Word spread fast throughout the neighborhood. Karen had finally been put in her place, and the once fearful homeowners who had tiptoed around her ridiculous rules suddenly found their voices. The complaints began pouring in. Homeowners dug up every questionable fine, every abuse of power, every ridiculous citation she had ever issued. People who had once been too afraid to challenge her authority were now demanding a full audit of the HOA's financial records. And that was where the real trouble began. Turns out, Karen had been dipping into the HOA funds for years. Her little projects around the neighborhood weren't just about enforcing rules, they were about funneling money into her own pocket. New street signs, security patrols, and even a so-called community improvement initiative had all been carefully crafted scams designed to pad her personal bank account. When the full extent of her corruption came to light, The HOA board had no choice but to hold an emergency meeting. Karen, still clinging to whatever scraps of authority she thought she had left, showed up in her usual power stance, clipboard in one hand, self-righteous glare locked and loaded. But the moment she walked into that meeting, she knew she had lost. The board members, once loyal to her out of either fear or indifference, were now staring at her like a disease they couldn't wait to rid themselves of. One by one, homeowners stood up and shared their horror stories. The excessive fines, the arbitrary rule changes, the way Karen had turned the HOA into her personal empire. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. I recounted the spike strips incident in vivid detail, making sure to highlight the sheer insanity of her actions. The room erupted into murmurs, people shaking their heads, some even laughing at how ridiculous it all was. Karen tried to interject, tried to defend herself, but the more she spoke, the worse she made it. She had never been good at admitting fault, and that night was no exception. She doubled down, called the entire neighborhood ungrateful, and insisted that without her, everything would fall apart. That was when the police arrived. Apparently, the audit had uncovered more than just a few misallocated funds. Karen had been skimming money for years, but what truly sealed her fate was the discovery that she had forged signatures on multiple HOA documents, including fines and property liens. Fraud, embezzlement, falsifying records. It was a laundry list of charges that she had never seen coming. As the officers stepped forward, reading off the charges, Karen's face went through every stage of grief in a matter of seconds. First, there was shock, then denial, then an overwhelming sense of rage. She spun around, pointing at me, at the board, at anyone who would listen. "This is a setup," she shrieked. "This is a witch hunt. I was protecting this neighborhood. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this." But no one cared. People actually started clapping as the officers cuffed her hands behind her back and led her toward the door. As she was dragged away, she locked eyes with me one last time. I could see the pure hatred in her gaze, the absolute refusal to accept that she had done this to herself. But all I did was smile. Because in that moment, I knew Karen would be spending a long time thinking about all the choices that had led her here. And with her gone, the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The days that followed were filled with celebration. Someone even threw a Karen's Gone barbecue, complete with a cardboard cutout of her with a "You are no longer welcome" sign taped to it. The HOA board was overhauled, new leadership was put in place, and for the first time in years, people felt like they had control over their own homes again. As for me, I made sure to enjoy every second of my newfound freedom. No more random fines, no more HOA harassment, and best of all, no more spike strips waiting for me in the morning. But the best part? A few months later, Karen's house went up for sale. Apparently, legal fees and a mountain of fines had drained her savings, and she was forced to sell. And who do you think made an offer on it? That's right, me. And when the papers were signed and the house was officially mine, I made sure to make one final improvement to the neighborhood. I turned Karen's old yard into a community dog park, complete with a giant sign that read, "All dogs welcome, even the ones HOA Karen hated." And every time I saw people laughing, playing with their dogs, enjoying the very space she had once ruled over with an iron fist, I knew that poetic justice had been served.